Okay, so last week we talked about substituting um, stitches for doing increases, and this time we're going to talk about decreases. So for the most part, when you're doing decreases, you're going to do either a right-leaning decrease or a left-leaning decrease. Decreases by their very nature utilize stitches, so we don't have the same issue that we had last week with increases as to whether or not it utilizes a stitch, right? Every single decrease will, because you're trying to get rid of stitches. So your standard right-leaning decrease, one stitch decrease, is knit two together. And so that's really straightforward. And obviously, if you have a pattern that just says decrease, you could choose whether you want it leaning to the right or leaning to the left, and you would want to stay consistent but for the most part, your patterns will dictate what you want done with that. And you should always, be sure that you're looking at the abbreviations, because it'll often give you that little extra instruction of what you want done. Okay, so leaning to the left decreases, there are a few things to consider. So our most standard right now that people are using is an SSK, which is slip, slip, and knit. So while that's currently the most popular, that doesn't mean it's our only option. You also have an SKPO, which is slip one, knit one, and pass your slip stitch over. But you also have a knit two together through the back loop as an option, which we'll talk about. And there are even a couple of ways to do that SSK and have it look a little bit different. And so those become questions. Again, all of these are single stitch decreases that use 2 stitches. This video is not really designed to teach you how to do each one of these. It's really just talking about what they look like. So if you want more instructions, there are separate videos here that do go into great detail. Okay, so your standard SSK is just a slip one, insert, and knit those 2 together. And so you can see you have a really nice, fairly simple looking decrease that is not super bulky, really straightforward. The difference between that and an SKPO is we slip one, knit one, and pass that slip stitch over. So an SKPO actually often in a chart even has a little leg hanging down on it, because one of the things that you see is when you do an SKPO, first of all, that stitch that was never knitted is a little bit bigger, right, than your SSK, and you see a little more of that stitch underneath. So if you wanted your decrease to be more obvious, then an SKPO is not a bad idea. Okay, so what does it look like if we knit 2 together through the back loop? We're just going to pop in there and knit those 2 together through the back loop. And you see that it twists both of those stitches. And so I don't love it simply because it makes it a little bit thicker and a little bit bigger. And because you're twisting both of them, you're making this leg more prominent, and you're also changing the gauge. So one of the new sort of an alternate way to do an SSK is you can slip the first stitch knitwise, slip the second stitch purlwise, knit them together. And what that does is sort of a happy medium, that it gives you that really, really nice stitch on the top as you'd have in an SSK, but it makes the stitch underneath, it twists the stitch underneath. So it's a little bit smaller, and so your SSK is just a little bit neater. So that's a really, really nice option. I was talking to my business partner, Bridget, about this, and she said, oh, do you do it where you don't slip them at all? And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So this is kind of clever, so I thought I would show you. I've just learned it myself, and it felt a little fiddly when I first started doing it, but as you get faster, it's a pretty nice option. So instead of slipping, you're going to enter the first stitch knitwise, enter the second stitch through the back loop, and then you knit the 2 together. And that is the same as slipping the first stitch knitwise, second stitch purlwise, and knitting them through. I'll show you that one more time. We're going to come in and just enter the stitch without knitting it and without slipping it through the front loop, the back one through the back loop, and then knit the 2 together. And again, it takes just a second, but it's giving you that really nice, tidy neat SSK, and it is kind of a nice way to do it. That's maybe not as fiddly. Okay, so those are single stitch decreases. Now, there's some confusion too when we get into 2-stitch decreases. So you can have 2-stitch decreases that are designed to come up the center. This is referred to often as a center double decrease. You can have 2-stitch decreases that are designed to lean to the right. This is typically a knit 3 together. And just with a knit 2 together, that's pretty much your choice if you want it to lean to the right. So the confusion once again comes in when you're trying to decide what to do in a left leaning decrease, and even a little bit of confusion that can happen between a center double decrease and a left leaning. Because the other thing that a CDD is known as is an S2KPO, which means you're slipping 2 stitches, knitting 1, and passing those 2 stitches together over. That is versus an SK2PO in the left leaning, which is a slip 1 stitch, knit 2 together, and pass that slip stitch over. The other way that you can do your left leaning is an SSSK. So we have choices when we get down into these. Again, for your right leaning, there's one way to do it. For your left leaning, there's 2, and then you have some confusion between these 2. So let me just show you what these look like. An S2KPO is done when you're trying to get your stitches to come to a point. So typically this is in like lace work where you have done a whole series of SSKs and knit 2 togethers, and you're coming to a point and you have 3 stitches left and you're trying to get them to come right up to a point. This is probably my favorite decrease in all of knitting. It's really, really lovely. And it means I'm going to come right down on the tips. I'm going to slip 2, sorry, let me actually get in frame. I'm going to slip 2 stitches together knitwise, knit 1, and then I'm going to pass those 2 stitches together over. And when I do that, it gives me this really lovely straight up the center decrease. And what you're really trying to do is you're saying, I'm working with these 3 stitches, and I want the middle one to sit on top of the others. And that's how you do that, is slipping these first 2 knitwise, knitting 1, and then passing them over. If on the other hand, I want it to lean to the left, then I'm going to slip the first stitch. I'm going to then knit these 2 stitches together, and I'm going to pull that slip stitch over. And that gives you a very dominant lean to the left stitch. So you can imagine if you confuse the 2 and you're working really hard to get your stitches to come to a point, and you want this look and you end up with that, it's like your pyramid had its head chopped off. So it is important to know the difference between those 2. Now, in terms of what you want your left leaning decrease to look like, you have certainly this choice, and then you also have the choice of an SSSK, which is slip 1, 2, and 3, enter, and you'll notice that all of these are slipping knitwise, enter the front of those 3 stitches and knit them together. The difference between them is this is maybe a little bit thicker, but the stitch on the top is actually less noticeable. So it will feel thicker, but you won't see it as cleanly as you see this one. And you'll also recognize that this has quite a bit of that understitch underneath it, where this one doesn't have as much. So it's really, this always, as everything, comes down to an individual choice on what you want your knitting to look like. Okay, I thought I would tell you one other thing, because one of the confusions that people often have in knitting is when it tells me to slip, am I supposed to slip purlwise, right? Or am I supposed to slip knitwise? So there's a rule in knitting which says you will always slip purlwise unless you are doing a decrease or otherwise instructed. So you would always slip purlwise unless doing a decrease or otherwise instructed. And the reason you typically knit or slip knitwise in a decrease is because you're coming in and manipulating that stitch one more time, which does turn it around. The exception, of course, being our alternate way to do that SSK, where we are intentionally slipping that second stitch purlwise in order to get it to twist and sit a little bit flatter underneath. So I just thought that might be a little helpful to hear. So as always, if this was helpful and you liked it, we sure would appreciate a like, a share, and a follow. We are committed to continuing to bring you short, single topic videos that are no muss for no fuss. And so hopefully this has been helpful to you. Have a great one. See you next time.